Today, we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 4, if you want to go ahead and turn over there. And we're going to begin in verse 8. 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning in verse 8. And the question we're going to ask today is, mothers, is it right with your family? Now, this doesn't just include mothers who have children in the house. It also includes mothers whose children have grown up. It also includes the grandmothers and the fathers and anybody else. But Elisha directs this question to one particular mother, as we're going to read later. And the question is it right with your family? There's actually three questions there. And we're going to focus on all three of those questions as the purpose of our lesson today, to demonstrate the responsibility and role that not only do we all have in caring for one another, but for the special role that a mother has in caring for her children and her family. Let's begin in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 8. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food. Now, I'm just going to make a side note for you that is important for our study of the New Testament, particularly in Acts chapter 10. In Acts chapter 10, Peter says that it wasn't lawful for him, being a Jew, to go in to a Gentile's house. But here we see in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 8 that this was not a law that was in the law of Moses. It must have been something that the elders had said was wrong to do. And that just goes to show you that some of the Jews placed the traditions of the elders as high as they did sometimes even the law of Moses. Elisha knew of no such rule, and so he had no problem going in this woman's house and eating with her. I just thought that was an interesting side note. So she persuaded him to eat food. Already we see the hospitality of this prominent woman, as the New American Standard says. She invites this stranger in to eat food with her because she recognizes him, particularly. This wasn't the original intention of bringing him in, but intentionally, or rather, eventually, she recognizes that he is a man of God. But rather than waiting to learn about him, to invite him in, she invited him in before then. So she's a very hospitable woman who really wants to care for those that are traveling through her particular town. Now here in verse 9 it says that she says to her husband, "Behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God, passing by us continually." And you'll notice that every time he passed by, verse 8, he would stop in and he would have food with her. Sharing your home and offering food to somebody is a great way to show hospitality. And this, as we're going to see in a moment, is why Elisha was so willing to perform this wonderful miracle for her that we're going to read about and study about today. So he passed by there continually, and she perceives that he's a holy man. So notice what she does. Verse 10, "Please, let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand. And it shall be, when he comes to us, that he can turn in there." So she recognizes this wonderful man of God as to who he was. She recognized his dedication to the Lord. And she knows that he's constantly traveling, preaching and teaching this way and that way. And so she says to her husband, we need to make something special for him. And so they wall off a particular part of their house. They set a table in there and a chair and give him a bed. And so he has his own little living quarters every time he passes through this particular village in which she lives, or maybe a city in which she lives. And so in verse 11 we see, "One day he came there and turned into the upper chamber and rested. Then he said to Gehazi his servant, 'Call this Shunammite.' And when he called her, she stood before him. He said to him, 'Say now to her, Behold, you have been careful for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army?' And she answered, 'I live among my own people.' So he said, 'What then is it to be done for her?' And Gehazi answered, 'Truly she has no son, and her husband is old.' So she doesn't want any special recognition before the king or before the people or for anything like that. She just wants to remain in her own circumstances. She's happy with where she's at in life, caring for her husband and caring for these passerbyers as they come through her town. But one thing that Elisha's servant recognizes, his friend there that would take care of him and tend to his needs, he recognizes that she has no son and her husband is old. Now, being a Hebrew, this would have reminded Elisha about Abraham, about how Abraham was old and Sarah was old and they didn't have a son. And in this way, in his culture, he had compassion on her. And so he calls her before him in verse 15. So she comes and she stands in the doorway. In verse 16 he says this, "At this season next year you will embrace a son." And she said, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." You can almost hear the hurt in her voice as she says this to Elisha. You know, she undoubtedly had tried many times before to have a child, but was unable. Don't know what her particular situation is, if she was simply unable to have children, or if there was something with her husband that wouldn't allow her to have children, or maybe they had tried to have children, but severe tragedy had struck them over and over and over again to the point where they may have just even given up on the hope of ever having a child. And so when Elisha tells her this, she's shocked. And you can just hear the pain in her voice. And she says, "No, man of God, don't lie to me about this." You know, I know that we all probably have friends, and there may be even somebody here that is in a similar situation as to this woman here that we're reading about. I've got friends that are very close to me that they weren't able to have children, and so they adopted in place of that. They've had several very, very unfortunate, just awful circumstances because of their particular situation, to where they even had children and eventually even lost them because of just the terrible afflictions that they have to deal with. And so I know just from talking to them that this would be their same reaction. Something that they hoped for forever, but now just given up all hope on it. So she says, "No, my Lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." But then, notice verse 17. "The woman conceived and bore a son at that season next year, as Elisha had said to her." What a change of events in her life. This whole time she's waited to have a child. She wasn't able, she gave up hope, and now she's had one. Now those of you who've had a child, and for me, those of me who have had a cat, we know how much love and care you have for that little baby. When I was in the 5th grade, my youngest sister was born, and I just remember, sitting there and holding her just because of the love that I had for my little sister. Would try to help her walk and things like that as she got older, and talk to her and just spend time with her. I even got in a fight in school when I was in the 7th grade because she had swept up all of the. We take allergy medicine in the morning, and my next to youngest sister left it out, and she got a hold of the pills, and they were unsure if she had taken them or not, and so they rushed her to the hospital. I was afraid the whole day, and another little boy said something very mean about her, and so we got into a fight, and I got suspended for 3 days from school. And my mom made me eat white bean chili every day, wouldn't let me have anything else. and I had to weed eat. We live in the middle of a pasture, and I had to weed eat up and down our 1/4-mile driveway and trim everything, any bush that didn't even matter to her, as punishment for getting in a fight. The point was, though, even as a sibling, we have a great care for that newborn child, great love for him, and a very special connection. And so you just have to imagine that this woman is so excited that this saying of Elisha has come true. Now notice in verse 18, "When the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to the reapers. He said to his father, 'My head, my head.' And he said to his servant, 'Carry him to his mother.'" Now you can probably picture this. The father's back behind his desk working on something, and the young child comes to the father and wants to talk to him, wants to speak to him. He says, "Son, I'm working. In fact, there's one story that some tell about this judge that was speaking to this young man who was about to have to go into jail. And his father was a very prominent lawyer that had written this wonderful book on law. And the judge asked the man, with such a father as you have, who knew so much about the law and so much respect for the law, how could you ever be in the situation that you are? And the young man responded, "Well, when I would go talk to him, he would never, he's always busy writing his books and doing things like that, and he never had time for me." And the judge commented something, "Alas, he was able to finish his book, but he never finished raising his son." And this is sometimes the struggles that we have in a very busy lifestyle that we carry. that we could be like this father out there in the reapers and say, go away from me now. Let your mother deal with you. Or maybe the mother would say, go away now. I'm cooking, I'm cleaning, I'm doing something, I'm tending to something. I don't have time to deal with you right now. And notice what happens to this young man. He was taken and brought to his mother, verse 20, and he sat on her lap until noon. Think about that. This isn't just a small child anymore, but this child is a little bit grown. And she sat there and she held him in his lap until noon. She set aside everything that she did to care for her household, and she took care of this young child. But notice what happens. This child passes away, you read about here. The child died at about noontime. So she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. You cannot even begin to imagine, or maybe you can, if you've dealt with this particular situation, just the terror that is going on in this woman's mind now. She has this son that she waited for her whole life to come and even given up hope on having. And then now he's finally born. But now that he's grown, it seems like for no reason whatsoever, he's been taken away from her. She goes up and in sadness she lays him on the bed of the man of God. But notice that she doesn't go and tell her husband. She doesn't go and alert the farmhands, anything like that. She's going to go directly to this man of God. Notice verse 22. She called to her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return. He said, why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it'll be well. Then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you. So she went and came to the man of God to Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi his servant, behold, there is the Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. Now these are the three questions that we are going to address to ourselves today after we finish reading through this account. Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? And is it well with the child? Elisha recognized that this woman had some responsibility to herself, to her husband, and to her children. But in this particular case, to her child. Now she answers, it is well. Now you wonder why she answered this way with her son lying at home dead. Because of that head trauma he allegedly had experienced. Not sure exactly what was going on with him there. But it may be that she said it is well because she was simply trying to seek audience with Elisha. But it may also be even that it was well in that she recognized that Elisha was a man of God and that he would be able to assist her child in this way. Think about it. He was able, through praying to God, allow her to have a child at this old age. And surely he would also be able to bring that child from the dead. This may be an expression of her hope and her faith in this man of God, and most importantly, in God himself. So let's go here now and read on through here in verse 27. When she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught hold of his feet, and Gehazi came near to push her away. But the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. Then she said, do I ask for a son for my Lord, that I not say, do not deceive me? She's holding on to Elisha's feet in just utter sorrow. And she's saying, I asked for a son, and I asked you not to deceive me. Specifically, she says here, she's saying, did I ask for a son? And the answer is no, she didn't ask for a son. At this point, Elisha offered it to her. And then she also says, did I not ask you, do not deceive me? I didn't ask for this. Surely she had wanted it, but she'd given up hope on it. But she did not want Elisha to deceive her, and now she's felt like she's been deceived. And now Elisha knows what the problem is. This son that she has been given has died. And so he says to Gehazi, gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him. And if anyone salutes you, do not answer him. And lay my staff on the lad's face. The mother of the lad said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And he arose and followed her. So the situation here is Elisha's just going to send a servant out, and she says, nope, I'm not going without you. And so he has to go along. All right, so in verse 31, we see Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him, and told him, the lad is not awakened. When Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child, and put his mouth on his mouth, and his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands, and he stretched himself out on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. And he returned and walked in the house once back and forth, and went up and stretched himself on him, and the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. Now, you wonder, why did he do it exactly like this to bring this man back to life? Well, there's a lot of things that the prophets did in the Bible that we perceive as being strange, but that God used for them as sort of an act to demonstrate their faith. For example, you remember how Jesus took the mud and made it into sort of with his own spit, made it into sort of a clay and rubbed it on the man's eyes. And you'll recall even how was it Naaman, right, that dipped 7 times in the Jordan to be healed of his leprosy. And so this is just another sort of a test from God, at least this is the way that I see it, as something that didn't have to be done, but that was done in order to demonstrate the power of God. And so he called Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite. So he called her, and when she came to him, he said, take up your son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out. This is just a beautiful story of a woman who lost all hope in ever having a child. And then she was given that child by the Lord, and it seemed like all hope was lost again, and yet God miraculously intervened to restore this child's life to this mother. The roller coaster of emotions that she must have felt in her life is something that none of us want to feel. But it's a story of extreme dedication to her family and willingness to trust in God to overcome all the obstacles that the family would face. What we're going to do, though, now is take a secondary application to our life and ask these 3 questions to each of you mothers. And, of course, the fathers can just switch some of the words around and fit in for them as well. And these questions were these. If you go back up in your Bible in 2 Kings chapter 4, and we're going to look at verse 23. Oh, sorry, not 23, but verse 26. Elisha, is going to send Gehazi to ask this woman 3 questions. Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? Now we notice that all 3 of these questions might not apply to every single person here. But the first one does for sure. Is it well with you? So let's focus on that one for a moment. Is it well with you? What is your stance in God's eyes? How does he view you? Does he view you as a child of God? Or does he view you as one that maybe has gone astray? As one that maybe hasn't put their full faith in God and put their full focus in him? Before you can take care of those around you, you first have to learn how to take care of yourself. If your life is a mess, how are you going to be able to tend to those around you? If you aren't following God, how can you ever expect anybody that you're friends with to listen to you when you tell them about the gospel? We have to examine ourselves, and only then can we go out and seek to help others. In a similar situation, not exact situation, but in a similar situation, Jesus warned his disciples that they needed to judge with righteous judgment. Why do you judge your brother whenever he just has a little speck in his eye, and you've got a whole telephone pole in your eye, or a beam in your eye? You want to go and help everybody else, but you have all these problems yourself that you haven't even admitted to yourself that you have. And so, before Elisha goes and asks about the family, he says, is it well with you? And this is an important lesson that we need to take and apply to ourselves. Before we can seek to help others, we need to first fix the things that we've got going wrong in our life. Make sure our lives are right with God. For example, if a doctor is sick and he goes in to work on his patients, all he's going to do is make them more sick by imparting that sickness into them. That's why, doctors wash their hands and things like that, because if not, they're going to do more harm than good. We need to make sure we have ourselves in order before we seek to help spiritually someone else. The second question that he asks here is it well with your husband? The wife has a certain obligation to her husband, and the husband has a certain obligation to her wife. Not just in marriage and in the organization of the house, but spiritually as well. Go with me in your Bible to 1 Peter chapter 3. And let's notice how the believing wife can save the unbelieving husband. In 1 Peter chapter 3, begin in verse 1. And I want you to notice where it starts. It starts the same place that Elisha started, with the wife, with yourself. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. As they observe your chaste and respectful behavior, your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair, wearing gold jewelry, putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. That is 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Here in the very beginning of this chapter, Peter tells the wives, if you start with yourself, inside the heart, if you start here, then you're going to be able to influence your husband. He'll be able to be won without a word. But this just doesn't just go with a husband-wife relationship. This goes with any relationship in the world at all. If you have a coworker or a friend, or maybe someone that you just meet, that you just meet on the street, if you live in such a way to where the quality of Christ can be seen in you, then you can win over that person without ever speaking a word. You can help them see the shortcomings in their life and the need for Jesus in their life by demonstrating your need for Jesus in your life. And so here in 1 Peter chapter 3, Peter is asking basically the same questions to these wives that Elisha asked to the woman there in 2 Kings 4. Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? We have a responsibility to each other as Christians to be good examples to each other. And we have that same responsibility to people in the world as well. Peter goes on, and he is going to give two examples of this, not two examples, but one example of this in verses 5 through verse 7. He says, for in this way in former times the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you become her children if you do what is right, without being frightened by any fear. So again, Sarah had some sort of spiritual service to Abraham, and she adorned herself not with gold and jewels and things like that, but she adorned the inner person of her heart with the qualities that God would have her to have. But notice verse 7. You husbands in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. We would be foolish to deny that there's any difference between man and female. There's difference that, we are affected by things in this life in different ways. And so as that, we have different responsibilities towards each other. It's not sexist or misogynistic to acknowledge these differences, but it's responsible to acknowledge these differences. Not that one is better than the other, but we all have different roles in this life that we're to carry out. For example, in the organization of a church, in some churches you have elders and deacons, and then your members. One is not better than the other just because they have different roles. And the husband is not greater than the wife, or the wife greater than the husband, because they have different roles. The husband and wife are on the same team working towards the same object with an equal standing in the sight of God. The point of all this, though, is to demonstrate that you ask these questions to yourself. Is it right with you? Is it right with those around you? Is it right with your husband? Is it right with your wife? How are you fulfilling your spiritual responsibility to them? And then the last question that we ask, following Elisha's pattern, is it right with your children? How are your children? Where are they at today? What are they doing this day? Are they following God, or are they following man? Are they working to support their family on this morning? Are they not caring about God at all in their life? Where are they? What's their attitudes? For those of you who have children that are out of the house as well, what are they doing this morning? the way that they live, is that something that is that a way that God would have them to live? And what can you do to be a positive impact in their life? Let's go in our Bible to the book of Ephesians chapter 6 and talk about this for a moment. In Ephesians chapter 6, in the beginning it says in verse 1, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Children, Ephesians chapter 6 verse 1. And now verse 2 says, "Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth." But notice this. This is often forgotten. "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." This is not only the role of the father, but it's also the role of the mother in taking care of that child, and not doing it to provoke them to anger, but to do it to bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. That's all of our responsibilities, not only towards children, but also to each other. So ask yourself these questions. Is it right with you? Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband, or is it well with those around you? Is it well with your wife? And finally, is it well with your children? How are your children today? Have you checked on them, not only on their physical health, but have you checked on their spiritual health lately? These are things that we should be invested in as family members and as brothers and sisters in Christ. Elisha's actions towards that woman that we read about there in 2 Kings chapter 4, none of us will probably ever experience something as drastic as she did. Not in the sense that we won't have issues like that in our life, but in the sense that God miraculously intervenes in that way to bring about all these different occurrences. But we'll all face something like that in some way. And what we need to do is to be ready and to be prepared that when those trials in life come, that everybody's ready. Ourselves are ready, those around us are ready, and our children are ready. If we're not prepared, to face these trials, then we're either going to fall apart when they come, or we're going to be devastated when we realize that our family and our loved ones didn't know God like they should, because we didn't take the opportunity to share that story with them. And so we have a great impact in each other's lives, as we talked about from 2 John. But there's probably not a greater impact that one can have on another than a mother's impact on her children. And that doesn't just go for before they leave the house. It also extends on even today. And so, with that being said, ask yourselves these questions, evaluate where you are, and see what you can do to improve. There's always room for improvement. And if you ever need help improving, you've got a wonderful book that you're holding in your hands right now that can give you many ideas about where to start. That being said, a great way to start is by becoming a Christian. And so if, you need to go cut it off for me, Jane? And so if anybody here is yet to become a Christian, or maybe you have, but you need strength and encouragement in your life, this is a wonderful time to make that right. Does anybody have such a request? All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here today.